On today's episode of the Black Studies podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Bonnie Thornton Dill, professor in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. A pioneering scholar of intersectionality and highly regarded visionary leader in higher education, Bonnie Thornton Dill's early research on the intersections of race and gender in work, family, and poverty for Black women led to the publication of 3 books, numerous articles, and inspired her founding 2 research centers, the Center for Research on Women at Memphis State University and the Consortium on Race, Gender, and Ethnicity at UMD. She has held multiple leadership positions over 35 years, including chair, research director, and the dean of the University of Maryland College of Arts and Humanities. She has served professional associations in such prestigious positions as chair of the Big Ten Academic Alliance, Liberal Arts and Dean Sciences Group, from 2018 to 2022, Vice President of the American Sociological Association, and President of the National Women's Studies Association. Currently, she is a co-principal investigator on Humetrics HSS, a humane metrics initiative that creates and supports values and acted frameworks for evaluating scholarly life and enhancing scholarly practice, as well as Breaking the Mold, Mellon, Maryland Opportunities for Leadership Development, a professional development initiative to create a pipeline of senior leadership for faculty members of color and women in the arts and humanities. Her accomplishments as dean for 11 years include expanding faculty diversity, leading development and launch of the campus-wide Arts for All initiative, increasing external support for research and scholarship by 50%, raising $80 million in gifts, and introducing an integrated career curriculum approach to student learning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies podcast. Today, we have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Dr. Bonnie Thornton Dill, who is a professor in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and a professor in American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. Hello, Dr. Thornton Dill. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. We much appreciate you being here.
I'm excited.
It is the end of the semester. I know you were almost done.
Yes.
So I do not want to take up too much of your time. So I will get started. So how did you get into Black Studies?
So, I guess I would say that I've always been interested in African American people, history, culture, experiences, and that began as a child, really, in many ways. And so, but in my own kind of disciplinary, scholarly work, before I went to graduate school and I was doing a number of other things, always kind of around issues of inequality and poverty and Black folks and what was happening to Black folks in the U.S. And so I had also been I'm a child of the 60s, and I was very much struck is the right word. I was around when the Moynihan Report was published and came out, and all of that came up. And so kind of in response to that, I was working at the time as a counselor in the SEEK program, which was one of the early programs to really bring particularly Black and Latino youth into the City University of New York system. And I had the opportunity, there was a Black Studies department was just starting, and I had the opportunity to teach a course there on the Black family. And I loved doing that, and I loved doing the research, really. I enjoyed the teaching, but I really enjoyed the research and the study and just kind of seeing what had been written particularly by Black scholars about Black people and their families. And that's what led me into my own work on my doctorate, which is in sociology, and a dissertation on Black women domestic workers and their families. And so that was kind of my introduction as a scholar to all of the work that Black sociologists in particular had done, E. Franklin Frazier and, and anthropologist St. Clair Drake and all of those people, that whole kind of Chicago school of sociology, much of which was, had prominent Black people in it. So that's really kind of where I got started and the interests. And so at moving from kind of family studies, which it was then, to gender and women studies. I probably should say women and gender studies if I'm going to talk about the order these things came in a way. That focus on Black women and their lives became central to the work that I did.
So I have follow-ups. One, so in working with the Seek program, which I can't imagine what it was like to work with Seek at that particular moment in time, what were some of the things that you saw as differences between maybe more traditional disciplines and the work that was happening in Seek and the focus on Black families and Black and Puerto Rican families at a time when those things were being advocated for and pushed for in a very student-led way?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so my experience in Seek, there's kind of a broader context, and that is that I began right after college working in the war on poverty in New York City. And I had the opportunity in doing that work to do a couple of things. One was to observe and participate in a lot of the community activism that was taking place around schools and particularly Black and Latino parent control of schools in the New York City system. There was a strike, there were all kinds of things like that. And then, also, I was in the process of setting up community corporations in low-income communities around New York City. And that was all about one of the provisions of the War on Poverty was something called maximum feasible participation of the poor. And so all of this was about letting the voices and the ideas and the thoughts and the visions of poor people, particularly Black and Latino people, but particularly Black people in terms of my interests, be heard, be recognized, be institutionalized in some ways. So that's kind of the context and the background for. So Seek was kind of another way of really bringing students who had been excluded into the City University system of New York, which is a huge system in which it produced a lot of people and had been an avenue for mobility for many groups prior to kind of opening up to Black students in particular. And so I think that that and I guess I saw this subsequently, the push for Black studies in many ways came from students. And it was citywide. I mean, it wasn't just I was at Baruch College, but it was citywide. I think that was one of the things that was people were like, we want to hear more, we want to see more, we want to know more, we want access to these kinds of things. And I was primarily a counselor. I had the opportunity to teach in the new Black Studies program, but I was primarily a counselor. And it was a teeny little, it wasn't really even I don't know if it was a program yet, Black Studies. It was, a few courses. The other thing about it was that it was a very interdisciplinary dialogue. And the person who led that program and was really a strong advocate for it was a literary critic. and who was writing. I guess that was the other thing, that people were really writing about the Black experience in some new and exciting ways. The person who ran that program was Addison Gale. And so many of these conversations were not just conversations kind of on campus. They were conversations in people's houses. They were conversations. So all of this about um, our culture, our story, was really very much a part of my formative years. And even though I was not in a Black Studies program, it really pervaded the ways in which I thought about and worked, as a counselor and later as a sociologist.
Thank you. Um, so kind of getting into the next question, but also building on that, uh, you are a trained sociologist,
Mhm,
but you have also been influential to understandings of intersectionality and really field changing with the work that you've done. Um, so how would you situate yourself in relationship to the multiple disciplines that your work has touched?
mhm. So I am a trained sociologist, and sociology always made sense to me as a way to explain and understand the world. Um, but at the time I came to Maryland, I I switched. I left a sociology department, and I was very active, and I remained active in the field, in the discipline of sociology. But I came into a women at that time, it was a women's studies department, and it was interdisciplinary, and I struggled at points about how do I maintain my kind of sociological identity, and also, but I came um, to Maryland in women's studies because I really wanted the opportunity to expand my own lens or lenses for thinking about this work. I mean, the intersectional stuff. However, my experience in terms of intersectional stuff was located in sociology. There were 3, 4 of us, 4 colleagues, all of whom were sociologists, and we were all people who either taught race and ethnicity in sociology, or we taught gender and used to be family in sociology. And we were frustrated because in the gender part, Black women were absent, or race was really not fully considered. And in the race and ethnicity part, women weren't considered. And so the discipline had an opportunity that you could apply for grants. You could apply for called Problems of the Discipline grants. And so the 5 of us kind of put together a proposal to look at the intersections of race and gender that were ignored in these 2 areas, and we argued it was a problem of the discipline. Well, we did not get funded. They did not consider that to be a problem of the discipline. But I think, and in some ways that was a launching point, because the greater attention that we got for that conversation and for those issues, and that we worked on together as a group and individually in our own writings and stuff, really got attention in women's studies. And so that really became a space in which we could talk about and advocate for, and argue for those things. And it's always so interesting to me now, because it's like intersectionality, everybody just kinda takes it for granted and goes from there, and I spent so much time arguing that you have to take race into consideration. You have to, the experience of Black women is not the same as the experience. So, it's interesting. I mean, it's great to see that shift, but it is also kind of a description of my own trajectory in terms of this. So, in many ways, for me, coming into women studies was a way of really going back to that kind of interdisciplinary dialogue about people. And in this case, it was interdisciplinary dialogue about women, but for me, it was interdisciplinary dialogue about Black women. And so that conversation between women's studies and Black studies, which often did not take place as much, I think, as it should have or could have, but that for me became those two spaces became a really important way for me of thinking about the issues that I was interested in.
Thank you. Building on that,
Mhm.
so you have your research and teaching, which I'm going to ask about in just a second, but you've
Mhm.
also been a dean and an administrator. And so I am curious as to how your commitment, not just to sociology and women's studies and Black studies, but like that intersectionality, um, how did that play out in your work administratively?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I've always been committed to issues of equality and justice. And so, as an administrator, um, it's not always easy, but you, I was always working on those issues in one way or another. So I remember maybe before I became dean, or just um, looking at the college and realizing that uh, the college was not hiring, had not hired Black scholars in the way that they had once. When I came, they were hiring a bunch of Black scholars, and then it kind of tapered off. And I looked at the data, and it's like, no, this is not good. We've got to turn this around. So that was one of the things, but it was not just it's the people. It's the people and what they represent and the ideas and the things that they're studying and what they bring to whatever field they're studying. But it is also uh, the scholarship and the ideas. And I remember when I first became dean, and I said to all of the department chairs that diversity was gonna be a high priority in hiring, and I went to every department, and I talked about that. And everybody, well, when a Black woman goes and tells all these people, it you're gonna get various kinds of reactions, and a lot that's not said. But one department chair said to me something like, "Well, there are a lot of fields we wanna hire in. We don't wanna hire in just one field." And I was like, "I never said anything about hiring in just one field." I so it was always a part of, um, what I was trying to do, and what I was trying to do not just in terms of the people who taught, but what gets taught, how broad how broadly we're representing the changes and growth in our fields, um, and then just, trying to set up processes that were equitable so that because a lot of times what happens in organizations is the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Mhm.
And people who know kind of how the system works will ask for things that people who don't know have no idea is even possible. And so just trying to set up processes so that no, it wasn't just who came and talked to the dean or who knew the dean. It's like, here's a process by which everyone can apply for something. And then there's a process of vetting and selecting. So moving it from kind of an old boys network or even an old girls network to something that was more that gave people a fairer chance at the opportunities that existed. And then the other thing is just sharing the knowledge um, uh, with others, so that and developing others, bringing other people along and developing them. So those are some of the things that ways I think my commitments to social justice, to equality, to racial justice got activated when I was an administrator.
Do you want to say anything on the Consortium on Race, Gender, and Ethnicity that you helped to found?
Well, sure. I'll say something about that, and I'll also say, if I can remember. I will also say something about the stadium and about um, Frederick Douglass Square. Um, so, um, so one of the things I guess that does characterize my own approach to leadership is a sense that um, no one person has the knowledge, that the knowledge is in the group, and that you go farther, learn more in a collaborative kinds of exchanges and exchanges where people can feel like they can share their ideas. And so there were a lot of people at Maryland at the time who were working in one way or another on issues of race and gender and ethnicity. And but there were little pockets and they weren't really visible. I mean, they were visible to a few people, but not necessarily even to each other. And so I in talking with other colleagues and friends, I saw this opportunity to kind of try to bring people together. And so we began to talk about that. And we began to talk about the consortium as a way of providing a platform for um, making the work that we were doing more visible and more impactful, and making kind of a signature of Maryland that we were doing this work that brought these things, race, class, gender, ethnicity, together, and that this was a place where you would get support and encouragement for doing that kind of work. And so that's really kind of how the consortium grew, and it started out as a joint initiative with um, women's studies and African American studies. And Rhonda Williams, who was a faculty member in African American studies, and I were kind of we were gonna trade off. I was gonna direct, and then she was gonna direct, and we're gonna go back and forth. Um, Sadly and unexpectedly, Rhonda passed. And so then it kind of kind of the way bureaucracy works, it kind of like, okay, it becomes kind of where the director is, becomes kind of the home of it in some ways. And it's very hard to kind of push against that. But that was how it got started, and we involved people from all across the campus, and really provided what do I want to say? It's not well workshops, but also like I don't know if they were poster sessions then, but ways of bringing people who were who were in education and who were in health and all of these kind of things, who were doing work on this together in one way or another through colloquia or whatever. So that was kind of how the consortium began and was operating as I was when I was directing it. Um, I said I was gonna say something about 2 other things, so if there's something you wanna ask something more you wanna ask about the consortium, I can stop and bring my other 2 things
Yeah, you
later.
can it's I would love to hear about the stadium in Frederick Douglass Square.
Okay. Well, when I think back about kind of contributions that I made at Maryland, I think 2 of the things I am proudest of was my work chairing the commission to rename the stadium from Byrd Stadium and representing um, Curly, as he was called, Curly Byrd, who was certainly a major um, player in the building of the University of Maryland, but was also an ardent segregationist and really worked to keep um, Black people off this campus as students or faculty. And one of his strategies for doing that was to invest and to push for money for the University of Maryland Eastern Shore because he believed in separate but equal. And so that was just interesting. And I didn't know a lot about him as when I took this on. And this was again student pressure. There was a lot of student pressure about this. And the young man who was kind of leading the charge, whose last name was also Bird, but not related, um, was like, "What side are you on?" Da da da. I said, "I'm keeping an open mind." And but certainly, and he wasn't too happy with that. But it was all right. He and I ended up on very good terms by the end. But so that was really kind of as you learned the story, and as you saw what he had done, it seemed like that was his name should not be on the stadium. And so that was an interesting process, interesting stories. But that was one of the things that I worked on and that I was glad to see come to fruition because it was not ultimately up to me. It was up to the president and then the Board of Regents, and they had to vote to make that change. And I think it was also timing. I think had it been a year later, I don't know if we would have gotten the change. So, so that was great. And the other thing was that I had worked for a while with, when I was dean, Ira Berlin kind of came and said, "Who is the most important Marylander that has ever trod the soil of Maryland?" So I said, "Frederick Douglass." And he said, "Right." And there's no representation of him on this campus. And so he got a group of us together, and we worked very hard to get some. And we didn't even know what representation we were seeking per se. We were not seeking a statue. In fact, we had talked with the person who was the provost at the time about a statue, and she said, "We don't do statues on this campus. We don't do statues. No, we're not going to do statue." So we were like, "Okay, well, what other kinds of ways can we?" In time, we did end up doing the statue and creating the plaza. And the day the plaza was to be inaugurated, or I can't remember, christened is not the right word, but anyway, the day it was to be inaugurated, um, we were getting ready to start the program, and a bunch of students took over the square, and they were, I don't even remember now what they were protesting about, but we had to wait until they finished their protests because and and that was such a fitting uh, statement about what this square and what Frederick Douglass represented. So it was like, oh, this was really cool. But so I really feel very gratified to be associated with those two things because they are kind of representations, important representations of the work of Black studies. They really are kind of the knowledge, the teaching, the principles that Black studies represents are exemplified. I mean, they are those two things are performative. I recognize that, but they are important, I think, representations to have on our campus.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I did not know about the protests that broke out during the dedication of the Frederick Douglass Square. I have my students do an assignment on reading spaces on campus, and a lot of students do Frederick Douglass Square.
Mhm. Oh,
And
great.
yeah, and a lot of them hadn't necessarily stopped to like read all the the
Mhm.
different quotes and everything, when they were just walking to and from. So having them stop and pay attention to it, they all really seem to like it once they look into the history and read all of the quotes that were selected and they see the intentionality behind it. Um, so thank you for your work
Oh,
on
that's great. That's great. That's great because we had fun picking quotes. So many to pick from. So
yes.
good.
So moving changing gears just a little bit, um, how is your work as a teacher informed by Black studies? And I guess like women and gender studies as well.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, they're all
Yeah.
together. And, really, how is it informed? Well, that's kind of what I do. I mean, it is both giving students the historical context for understanding some of the things they're reading, because I know you know this. It's like there's a lot of stuff that we assign students to read or whatever, and we're familiar with it. And certainly for me, I think at some point, it was early in my career, I realized that my lived experience was history to them. And it's like, oh, okay. They don't know what I'm talking about. So, so it really, I mean, I have taught courses on race, gender, and ethnicity and the intersection of them. And I've taught them in sociology departments, and I've taught kind of versions of that in women and gender studies, and I've taught Black women's studies, and I've taught so a lot of that is about African American history. I mean, it really begins there, and it begins with, and you can't understand it if you don't know something about African American history and the African American struggle. And so Black studies is foundational. Um, and for me, Black studies is foundational. I'm sure some people teaching women and gender studies would Black studies, it would not necessarily be foundational, but it certainly is for me. And then it's really kind of understanding the different ways in which, um, what's the word I wanna use here? The different ways in which white supremacy arises again and again and again. And and the ways in which Black people have subverted aspects of it, worked around it, um, pushed back against it, um, because that's really that's the part. I mean, that's Black studies. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the part. It's like what we have done with what has been taken away from us or given to us. What we have done with that, the difference that we have made, the ways in which we have built this country and this culture
Mhm.
that often get ignored in these. That's why I hesitated. Do I really want to say what white supremacy has done? Because you can get into a victim kind of thing if that's where you start. And really, the start is kind of what we've done with the circumstances that we had, the life choices and the life chances that have guided us.
I think that that's such an important point, and especially right now, there's a lot of lessons to be revisited, questions that have been asked and answered in certain ways that we could keep asking and seeing what updates to answers or sub answers and evolutions can come from those things. And I think that that's such an important piece of not just Black studies, um, but how we think about Black life in this country, period.
Mm. Well, that's so true, and I do feel like um, we we forget, Black people forget, that and we need to do a better job of not forgetting. But, we forget that our history is one which every time we make progress, there's a backlash.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we get so excited and happy and, enjoying our progress that we forgot. We weren't ready for the response to Obama.
Yeah.
Um, and we need to be ready in the future. I don't maybe this is just human life and human nature, and people get happy and accomplish some things and think they've made it and forget the struggle. But anyway,
No, I think you're right. We need to be ready in the future. And I think that one of the things that has been so amazing and, like, energizing, honestly, about this project with the podcast is being able to talk to Black women, period. But especially Black women who have senior scholars or Black women who have done this work, and it's like, but it's right there. Like, you are right here. You have done the work. You have written the things. And to be able to really not only engage with things that you and others have written before, but what's coming out now based upon that work. And, like, if we all just listen to Black women, it'd be so much better.
yes,
It's like,
it's true. It's so true. Um, I think the thing is, yes, we did this work. My generation, we've done this work. The work continues. The work still has to be done. And I think, unfortunately, in some ways, and maybe it's fortunate in others that I haven't thought about, but the Mozambique freedom fighters, Frelimo used to say, "A luta continua." I mean, the struggle is continuing. It is ongoing, and it doesn't go away. And so, hopefully, at first, 2 things. At first, with all of the stuff we're facing now, I felt discouraged because it was like, "Oh, all this work that we did, we worked so hard to get to this point, and now they're trying to erase it all." And, but 2 things I remember, and this is also where African American history is like a guide, it's a fundamental guide. It's like, look, we're not always marching and, doing, but people have always been working on these issues. And the material that people need when they can move out into the open is there, and people are building on it. And so it's like, okay, we did all this. If people can not lose that and not forget that, there is something to build on. And that's true not just for me and your generation, but that's also, I think, true when I think about what generations prior to us, um, lived through, died, in facing, and also, what they've given us, the tools they've given us to build on. So when I get down, I'm like, "Okay, listen, we've seen worse times than this." Not that I wanna, it's like, "Oh." I don't wanna revel
don't
in
want to.
right. Exactly. Exactly. But that we can make it through.
Thank you. That is a very important and necessary reminder in this moment. Um, and leads into the first of our last 2 questions.
Okay.
So what interests you most about the past of Black studies?
Well, one of the things that's interesting to me, and because I've been in women and gender studies, it's been interesting to think about the 2 fields,
Mhm.
um, in comparison to one another. and how, in many ways, women and gender studies ballooned and got resources and got visibility and all of that in ways that Black studies didn't. And I mean, I think there were several reasons for that. One is there were women as more and more, well, we know that who affirmative action benefited.
Mhm.
And as more and more women came into the academy, they were pushing for these issues in more places. So there were more of them to really push for these issues. But I don't know that there necessarily had to be. um, and so I do feel like kind of watching that was also watching a way in which um, certain ideas and people got nurtured and others were suspect or and I've seen that in the abstract but also in the particular um and so I guess for me one of the things about, you asked about administration earlier, but one of the things about being in administration was being in a position to work against that, to um, push for uh, a more equitable and a more just um, understanding of and support of the work that was taking place, that is taking place in Black studies. So I don't know. I think I've got off, but so that is something that has interested me to observe, um, and and I think that well, it's had different kinds of impacts in different places. I mean, you know, for whatever, um, I think it's also taken something like Skip Gates and all that he does on, public radio for whatever people may to legitimize, because it's really all about legitimizing the work that we do and having people pay attention to it. And then all of a sudden, and this is of course the interesting thing, all of a sudden they see, oh, this could be relevant to me. But we often don't get the credit for the groundbreaking work that has been done in Black studies in terms of interdisciplinary scholarship and in terms of um, justice and understandings of difference. And so, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you. So, last question. What interests or excites you most about maybe the future of where we're going? And if you want to speak specifically to Black women's studies, that's fine too. Because, like you said, those things they can't be divorced for you. So, what interests you most about where it's going?
Mm, mm. Well, in some ways, it feels like a hard question in the current moment,
Mhm.
um, because it feels like some of where it was going is being pushed aside as we kind of try to defend what we've already done, you know? Um, I think and yet, I think the work that people are doing about kind of, uh, well, I'll say Afrofuturism, although I'm not sure I really fully grasp Afrofuturism, but really about joy and pleasure and um, kind of positive spaces for growth and exploration and for claiming our full selves and kind of moving out of our the strictures of being always proper and always acceptable, and that's the generation I was raised in. It's always put on your gloves and your patent leather shoes when you go downtown to the department store to go shopping, that you gotta look a certain way. So, and kind of the full expression of ourselves, in a variety of ways, some of which, appall me and like, oh my god. But I think it's the fullness of our humanness,
Mhm.
and I think feeling free and able to express that, um, is really important as in kind of future directions. So that's exciting and scary, too. But, because it's scary, I guess, particularly for my generation, 'cause it's like, they're gonna use it against you. But the thing is, they're gonna use you know who they is. Um, they're gonna use things against you regardless. I mean, I'm struck by the ways in which people felt so, um I am just before affirmative action. Um, and so the people who kind of got in on affirmative, I'm before it, but I'm not untouched by it. Okay. In other words, once it's operating and I'm part of it. I'm not. But but the people who got into college and people said, "Oh, you're an affirmative action or whatever," and how um demeaning that was to people or how they felt upset and constrained by it. That's what I mean. They're going to use it against you anyway. I mean, people, yes, they needed to recruit more Black people, but you wouldn't have gotten in if you weren't any good.
Right.
So, um, they're not going to recruit people who were not good, unless they were trying to do something and that didn't last long. So, anyway, I'm rambling.
No, I think it's all great and amazing. But thank you. I appreciate that and all of your answers and insights and reflections. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, just really to thank you for inviting me to participate in this. I'm excited that you all are doing this podcast and kind of collecting these stories, and it's an important. Maryland has had a kind of special place in the place of Blacks in higher education, really. And it's interesting to me because I remember when I came here, but even before that, thinking about how this is an institution that I could not have attended, as a student. And, kind of to see the strides that it has made and the ways in which, Black leadership has been a part of the institution for a long time. I think it's an important story. And so I'm really glad that you are doing this podcast because I think it certainly has been a good place for me, but it has, been a place of growth and opportunity and a place that has not perfect, but certainly has had a better commitment than many. That's the way I'll put it.
That's very true. That, like,
So, maybe not good enough all the time, but a better commitment than many to some of these issues, and so, and yet I also know that there were times when it was not as good as it should have been, so, anyway, glad you're doing this.
well, thank you so much. And thank you for being here. Thank you for all of the work that you have done. Coming to, I got to Maryland 4 years ago and I got to campus and then I saw who all was on campus. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is, and I'm like, there's so many amazing, particularly Black women on this campus doing groundbreaking, field changing work. And I'm just so honored to be able to speak with you. And thank you so much for all that you've done.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and, I share that when I came, which was in 1991, I had looked at other places, and several of them, it's like and I came as a full professor, uh, I would have been the only Black woman full professor on some of those campuses.
Wow.
And I got to Maryland, and I knew a couple people here, Sharon Harley and a couple people. And then I saw who was here then, and I'm like, "Oh my god." And that also led to other things because, the book that Sharon edited with, on Black women in work,
Mhm.
a group of us were sitting around, it's like, "Look, this is exceptional. There are too many of us here not to be doing something together. We have to come together in some ways because it's just, who knows when this will happen again." So it's true. You get here and it's like, oh my God. So that's one of the things that's kept me here so long. It's been a rich group of sister scholars.
Well, thank you so, so much again. I hope
Okay.
the end of your semester goes smoothly.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the end of my semester and I am retiring in June. So this is the end of my official Maryland journey. So glad to do it at this time.
Yes, I saw there was celebration of your work. That was a couple weeks ago. And then that's when I was definitely like, no, I need to email her immediately. She's going
Thank
to
you
be
for
out
your
of
persistence.
here. So thank you. I hope that you enjoy your last end of the semester and the next chapter of not necessarily having to be in the day-to-day institutional grind.
Yes, right. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Take care. Bye bye.